Yet another rocket explosion on the Gaza Strip as clashes escalate now between Israel and Hamas, stretching into areas where we have not seen them before. And now another country's militants may be joining this battle.
The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens and layeth the foundation of the earth and formeth the spirit of man within it. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it.
It is unacceptable for citizens of both sides to permanently live in fear of the next aerial attack. All parties, including Palestinian armed groups, must respect international humanitarian law. Israel has legitimate security concerns, but I'm also concerned at the many Palestinian deaths and injuries as a result of Israeli operations.
The White House says it is prepared to broker a ceasefire. U.S. President Barack Obama spoke by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Obama said the U.S. is willing to help negotiate a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. This comes as Israel's assault on Gaza continues, with more than 300 Hamas targets hit on Thursday.
It is clear that the international community must accelerate efforts to achieve an immediate halt to this escalation and reach a durable ceasefire. All actors must exercise maximum restraint and respect international humanitarian law.
Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asser also is joined with them. They hope in the children of Lot. Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Kerethites. The word of the Lord is against you. O Canaan, the land of the Philistines, I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant. And the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds, and folds for flocks. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall be thereupon. In the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening. For the Lord their God shall visit them, and turn away their captivity.
Breaking news, more rockets fired into Israel yet again today, and the Israelis step up their air offensive on the Gaza Strip. Death toll in the air offensive said to be up to 100 Palestinians dead amid a new report that Lebanese militants have fired rockets on Israel's northern border.
The violence between Israel and Hamas forces in Gaza is starting to spread, and this morning the U.S. is offering to help them work out a ceasefire. President Obama called Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and expressed concern about further escalation.
Israeli tanks are lining up along the Gaza border. Rocket fire from Gaza this morning is blamed for the first serious injuries reported in Israel. We're also hearing of the first rocket attacks from Lebanon.
Good morning. There are threats being made by both sides here this morning. As Israel considers a ground invasion, Palestinian militants are warning that they intend to target Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport with rocket attacks. Gaza is being pummeled by Israeli airstrikes. In Rafah this morning, as they searched for survivors of one strike, more missiles forced them to scramble for cover. The Israeli military says it's trying to put a stop to this. Rockets fired by Palestinian militants into southern Israel. This morning they hit this gas station in Ashdod, injuring 3 people, 1 severely. But so far no Israelis have been killed, thanks in part to the country's advanced missile defense system, which shot down more rockets over Tel Aviv this morning. Israel says it's targeting those responsible for the attacks. This strike yesterday killed 3 militants with pinpoint accuracy. Several rockets were also fired into Israel this morning from southern Lebanon, which could mean that militants there have decided to enter the fray as this conflict worsens. Nora?
Holly, thank you.
Israelis running for shelter in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, seeking safety from Hamas rockets launched from Gaza, now a daily occurrence across Israel.
No country on earth would remain passive in the face of hundreds of rockets fired on its cities, and Israel is no exception.
Israel calculates there are 10,000 rockets in Gaza in the hands of various terrorist groups.
The amount of rockets that we're seeing come out of Hamas and the Gaza Strip is really kind of alarming. They're launching salvos of 40 at a time, over 100 a day.
A huge worry, the Hamas rocket called the M302. With a range of about 100 miles, it allows Hamas to reach deeper into Israel than ever before. Israel says Hamas is getting outside help. In March, Israeli forces stopped a ship containing M302s that the Israelis said came from Iran and were headed for Gaza. Several rockets are also locally produced in Gaza. Israeli airstrikes now aiming at rocket launch sites, production factories, and other militant targets. Israel's main defense? This system called the Iron Dome. Strategically placed units around Israel launch missiles against incoming rockets that appear headed for population centers. So far, Israel says it's worked well much of the time, but Hamas is looking for vulnerability.
I think what they're trying to do is fire as many as they can in a short period of time, because that overwhelms the Iron Dome sensors.
The U.S. has already spent nearly $900 million on Iron Dome, just part of the $3 billion in U.S. funding for Israel's defenses. The Pentagon is keeping a close eye on whether Israel will launch a ground incursion into Gaza. U.S. officials say it's not clear to them what will happen next.
Into the Middle East now, where the terrorists continue to attack Israel. The sirens wailing yet again just minutes ago. This as more rockets fall. Israel coming under an intense barrage of rockets from Hamas, targeting the heartland of the Jewish state. Let's take a look at some of the latest developments. Just a short time ago, the Israeli military confirmed to Fox News that 4 rockets were fired at Jerusalem. You can see the Iron Dome system there, intercepting successfully 2 of them. There's no word, though, on the impact of the other 2 rockets that were fired by Hamas. In response, Israel now stepping up its aerial offensive in Gaza. Israel hitting more than 320 targets since just last night alone. But the rockets from Hamas keep on coming. Israel says a rocket has been launched by the terror group, roughly 1 every 10 minutes. and in a clear sign of the vast arsenal that Hamas has, it is believed to have more than 10,000 rockets, with no signs yet that the Hamas militants intend to stop.
They're getting a lot of those rockets by way of Iran. In the meantime, Israel is facing perhaps one of the most advanced weapons yet to find its way into the hands of those terrorists. According to the Israeli military, those terrorists have recently added this rocket to their arsenal for the very first time. It's called the M302, and it's being called a game changer, which is why we wanted to talk a little bit about it. The reason that it's a game changer is because of some of this long-range capability that it has, and that means it can reach the heartland of Israel, putting the country's major cities and population centers at risk.
One of the reasons the tension is so very high right now, because the range has changed from just a couple of years ago. Let's get some reference points here. This is Israel. It's about the size of New Jersey, about 290 miles tip to tip, and you can see the relative width there. If you look at something like the mortars that they fire out from Gaza, it's going to go about this far. If you add in the very simple homemade rockets, they go about this far. Then you start looking at where they were a couple of years ago, where their range at best went somewhere out to here. But this time, there has been, according to Israeli military analysts, a real emphasis on developing better quality rockets that go all the way out here. And I say developing, it means developing in the sense that Hamas says they can manufacture some of these, but more importantly, you're talking about things like this, the M302 rocket, which was designed by China originally, is possibly made in Syria, and they have some undetermined number of these. These are much more robust than anything we've seen before. Rockets that have a range of 62 or more miles, maybe 100, like Barbara said earlier, about 16 feet long, limited accuracy, but they've increased a sense of vulnerability all over Israel, Wolf, that was not there before, and that's helped spur the military and political response.
Bill, this is Friday, the start of the Jewish Sabbath. Normally, this is a quiet time in this region. Today, though, anything but. Israel attacking Gaza once again from the air, land, and the sea. The Israeli military used aircraft, tanks, and ships. The big question on the minds of many, will there be a ground incursion? As for the death toll in Gaza, the latest number, 103 killed since this conflict got underway 4 days ago. Today alone, 13 people died in Gaza, most of them civilians, among them 5 people from the same family. Also, we are told, a 5-year-old girl. This, as the military here goes after launchers, tunnels, as well as the militants themselves. There was also a massive fire in Gaza's port today after the Israeli Navy fired on fishing vessels. You might recall that only days ago, Hamas militants infiltrated Israel from the Mediterranean. And today, Bill, the deadline for U.S. citizens in Gaza to alert U.S. officials that they might be needing assistance. And let's see if we can come back to a live picture. Bill, I want to show you off in the distance here. And this is a couple of miles from where we are. You can see the huge plume of smoke. Just a few moments ago, there was yet another airstrike in Gaza. And from our vantage point here along the border, we have seen many of these strikes in just the last few hours. We have also seen a number of rockets being fired by militants. Today alone, at least 70 rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel. At least one of those rockets that was not intercepted by the Iron Dome hit a gas station in the city of Ashdod. That station erupted into flames. There was a person who was disabled and couldn't get out of their vehicle, and because of that couldn't get to shelter and was seriously injured. Another rocket today hit a home not far from the border. This rocket, Bill, smashed through the roof of this home, and it smashed right through the kitchen. Fortunately, the inhabitants of this particular home heard the warning and were able to seek shelter. And very quickly, I should add that some 200 miles from where I'm speaking to you, the border with Lebanon, it looks like there's been another situation that has Israelis very concerned. In South Lebanon, which is Hezbollah-controlled, at least 2 rockets were fired into northern Israel. Israel responded with artillery fire. The Lebanese army showed up on the scene and found a 3rd rocket that was being readied to be launched. No one has taken responsibility. It appears to be an act of solidarity, not a coordinated effort with Hamas, but with what's happening here along the southern border, people are very, very much on edge, very mindful of what happened in the past, and there is concern that there could be some type of an escalation, although that appears very unlikely at this time. And lastly, we are expecting to hear again from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He is supposed to speak on television in just about 30 minutes' time. He spoke to the country last night. He's going to speak to the country again about this ongoing conflict on the minds of many. Will there be a ground invasion?
Yeah.
And David Lee, stick with us one moment here. Give us a sense of geography. You're on the Israeli side of the border, I do believe. And behind you, looking to your right, would be Gaza. And the airstrike that you just witnessed would be how far away from your location? As I talk about that, we have another camera angle that we can show our viewers, David Lee, which appears to be from Gaza City, which shows the results of the airstrike that you just showed us live. Go.
I would say that's the tip of Gaza City. It's maybe 3-4 miles at least from where we are. If you take a look at the border here to get some sense of our position, I don't want to be too exact here. You might be able to see some antenna towers. That's the end of the border. That's the end of Israel and the beginning of Gaza. And I'm guessing it's about 3 or 4 miles from where we are. The border itself is only about 1 mile, Bill. So we didn't feel this blast, but we certainly did hear it.
David Lee Miller, stay safe out there to you and your crew. Thank you. As that conflict continues, and he raises a great question. You know, what's the end game here, and how far will this go? And right now, we do not know.
Hamas rockets, Israeli airstrikes, and air raid sirens sending Israelis running for shelter. One rocket hitting the Israeli town of Ashdod tonight, causing damage. An earlier rocket hitting Beersheba, spraying shrapnel, damaging buildings. And in the Eshkol region, 2 Israeli soldiers injured by a rocket. Here in Ashkelon, where this rocket fell today, the mayor says he and his people will endure whatever they need to, even if it takes an Israeli ground attack to destroy Hamas's arsenal, believed to be about 10,000 missiles.
We will have the city and the shelters as long as it takes for the IDF to win, even if it takes a year.
Airstrikes in Gaza were clearly visible from our vantage point on the Israeli side of the border. We could see Hamas rockets going up from Gaza and mid-air interceptions by Israeli defenses, each side's air capabilities playing out in the skies. Israeli officials say they are targeting rocket launches like this one and Hamas command and control centers, often their family homes. Hamas says Israel started it with its crackdown in the West Bank after last month's kidnappings of 3 Israeli teens. So far, neither side's talking about the kind of ceasefire that has ended past conflicts. Israeli tanks poised near the border in case Israel orders a ground invasion.
The Hamas terror attacks on Israel are continuing, bombarding Israel's heartland with more rocket attacks. And in defense, Israel is now stepping up its air offensive in Gaza, while also mobilizing forces for a possible ground operation as well. We're waiting to see if that indeed will happen. All this sparking a warning from UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon that the crisis could quickly spin out of control. John Heddy's live on the Israel-Gaza border with more. John?
Jenna, the question really remains, as you mentioned, whether a ground offensive will happen. We could know that in the coming days or even coming hours, for that matter. Very quickly, I want to show you something. Behind me, maybe I don't know, half a mile if I had to guess. 3 mortars landed in an open field and a 4th hit a home just right around about an hour ago. And by the way, that area there is right on the Israel-Gaza border, and in the distance is Gaza City. Back to the possibility of a ground offensive. Earlier today, we went looking for some troops to see if they were getting ready, if they were in a staging area, and we did find some. Take a look at what we found. We're seeing ground forces amassed here. Tanks with 105mm cannons, heavy artillery with 155mm howitzer cannons, APCs, all-purpose carriers, and of course infantry that, if given the order, would move ahead with a ground assault. And those last vehicles are what are called D9 bulldozers, and basically are at the front of the line, so to speak. They'll clear the way for any advancing ground troops and ground forces. Quickly, let's go through the numbers. For airstrikes, the Israeli Air Force hit more than 320 Gaza militant targets overnight, bringing the total number to 780 strikes so far since Operation Protective Edge started on Monday. 84 Palestinians have been killed. Of them, a reported 23 children. Over 600 people have been injured in Gaza. And since early this morning, more than 100 rockets have been fired at Israel. 12 were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. 85 rockets landed. No one was hurt or killed, and that's really been the case in Israel since Monday. As for the possibility of a ground offensive, Israel's finance minister and cabinet member Yair Lapid said earlier that, quote, the formula of calm for calm is no longer on the agenda, and a ground assault is on the table. So really, again, as I said, Jenna, the possibility of this happening, we could find out in the coming days or even the coming hours for that matter.
Joining me now from Tel Aviv is Israel's Deputy Defense Minister, Danny Danon. And Mr. Danon, we understand the sirens just went off a few moments ago. It's very difficult for us to understand here because obviously we don't have that happening on American soil. But if it happens during our interview today, how much time do you have to get to safety?
Good afternoon, Jana. Here in Tel Aviv, we have 90 seconds to seek shelter. It might happen while we speak. I hope not. But I was in the south today, and in the southern cities of Israel, we have only 15 seconds. It's not easy when you drive your car to look for a shelter within 15 seconds. It is not easy for us in the home front. I am, as a father of 3 children, to explain to my daughters why they have to run in the middle of the night. It is not easy, but we are willing to do it. We are willing to pay the price in order to allow the IDF to strike against the Hamas terrorist organization and to make sure they understand that we are determined in order to allow the people in Israel to live safely, to sleep safely. This is something which is a given in the U.S. Here it's not a given.
The United States taxpayers are very much involved, though, in the defense of Israel, and that's because of our contributions to the Iron Dome missile system that intercepts a majority of these rockets and hopefully provide safety for the Israeli people. It's a joint project, we should mention, between our two countries. Mr. Danon, how crucial is our cooperation right now to the safety and security of Israel?
The cooperation is very important for us. The Iron Dome is giving a feeling for the people that we can overcome the threat of the missiles. Yet, we have to be very cautious about it. Some people feel too safe, and they avoid the instructions that we give them to look for shelters when they have to. But actually, when you look at the numbers, Jana, more than 400 rockets within 3 days, and we have no casualties, thanks God. We appreciate that, and the cooperation with the U.S. is very important, because the people who are sending the rockets, the Hamas, Al-Qaeda forces, if they could have sent a missile to New York City, they would have done it. They cannot do it. So they are threatening us in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem. But the hatred is the same hatred coming from Iran, coming from the radical Islamic forces.
We certainly are fighting a common enemy. I'm curious, though, to your assessment of the United States government's role over the last few days in this current crisis that you're dealing with. How would you describe the actions from our government? Has it been enough? Do you need more?
Well, we heard a very strong, important comment about the right of Israel to defend itself, but I think it's too early. I can imagine that within a few days you will hear the voices to stop the operation. And I'm sure that there will be pressure coming on our Prime Minister to stop the operation in the middle. And I told the Prime Minister, we need to do the right work, not to stop it in the middle. When they attack us, we have to fight back, we have to be determined. And I think that the time of checking the relationship between Israel and the US will come maybe next week when the EU, the UN, I'm not hearing the UN condemning the missiles flying to Tel Aviv tonight, but I'm sure they will condemn the actions of the IDF.
You know, from the outside looking in, again, coming from a wider perspective, it sometimes seems that the pattern of rockets between Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and Israel follows a familiar pattern. The fire sometimes burns hotter and hotter and hotter, then it subsides a little bit, but it never really goes out because Hamas, the terrorist group, still exists. And I'm curious about how this time is different, Mr. Janan. How do you fight to win this time? What are your intentions? What's the goal?
There are two options. The first option, which I prefer, is to fight deeply inside Gaza and to make sure that we take care of all the Hamas terrorists in Gaza. It is not easy. It is costly. It's a long-term operation. But eventually, we will have to do it. The second option is to hit back hard. Then you can buy time. It can be months, maybe a year or two, but then we will be back exactly where we are today, fighting with the Hamas again. I prefer the first option, to do a deep operation and to make sure that we don't have the Hamas operation on the ground.
What does that look like, that operation that you're describing?
Well, we haven't decided about that yet. The cabinet will have to sit and decide whether we're going all the way or not. But it means that we have to take ground troops, tanks, go inside Gaza and make sure that the terrorists, which are using civilian population, they're doing a double war crime, because first they use the civilians and they send the missiles from civilian populations, hospitals, schools, and they send the missiles to Israel into civilian population as well. So in order to catch them, you have to send in the troops and make sure they don't use the civilian population as they used to do it.
A final question, though. The civilian population is one of the reasons why there are those in the United States and those also in Israel that say that Israel really needs to show some restraint. You've been critical, though, and you mentioned it on our program as well, Prime Minister Netanyahu not being aggressive enough, not going hard enough at Hamas. How do you defend your position?
Well, I think we have to be aggressive. When you look at the Hamas and Al Qaeda forces, you have to speak with them in a different language. They don't understand our language. And for example, today we are transferring gasoline into Gaza on a daily basis. I think we should stop it. You cannot actually give gasoline into Gaza while they are shooting at us. And yes, unfortunately, sometimes, even though we are a democracy and we are a Western society, we have to speak with the Islamic radical forces in a different language. And I think that the only language they understand is strength. It's a pity. I wish we had better neighbors, maybe Canada, maybe Mexico. But, you know, we haven't picked our neighbors, but we have to deal with those neighbors in a very rough method.
Mr. Donato, we appreciate your time today. I know it's a crucial time for you in the country, and we look forward to having you back on the program. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.